Imagine waking up before the sun rises, not to check your phone or sip coffee, but to carry water from the Nile with your bare hands. The air is cool, the sky still dark, and the only sound is the soft rhythm of sandals brushing against sand. You're in a small mud brick house, surrounded by fields and stone, and the year is somewhere around 1350 BCE. You're not a pharaoh, not a priest, not a god, just an ordinary person in ancient Egypt, and your day is about to begin. But what does that day really look like? This isn't the kind of history that fills museums or textbooks. This isn't about golden tombs or secret curses or grand battles carved in temple walls. This is about daily life, the boring kind. The kind that repeats itself day after day in rhythms older than the pyramids themselves. And yet, when you look closer, it's anything but boring. What did ancient Egyptians do all day? The truth is, they did what we all do. They worked. They laughed. They worried. They told stories. They raised children. They got on each other's nerves. They stared at the sky when they had time to think. But unlike us, they did it all under the blazing Egyptian sun, with only the shade of date palms and mud brick walls to keep them cool. Let's follow one person. Her name is Sitra. She's a farmer's wife in a small village just outside the city of Thebes. Thebes is busy and full of noise. Temples, scribes, priests, and people moving in and out of markets. But Sitra's village is quiet. You can smell the earth before the sun touches it. You can hear the low grunts of oxen as her husband, Hori, prepares to lead them to the fields. Sitra stretches and pulls her linen dress over her shoulders. It's worn from years of use, patched in places but still strong. She walks barefoot across the cool floor of her home, a simple one-room structure made from baked mud. The roof is flat. The walls are plain. There's a small clay oven in the corner and baskets of grain piled next to it. Her two sons are still asleep on mats nearby, curled up like little cats. She doesn't wake them just yet. Her first task is to grind grain for bread. It's slow, heavy work. She kneels over a stone slab, using a smoother stone to crush the barley into flour. Her arms ache from doing this every morning. The dust clings to her hands, her clothes, her face. Sometimes she hums to herself to keep the rhythm going. Other times, she just lets her thoughts wander. She thinks about the heat that will come later. She thinks about her neighbor, Jet, who gossiped yesterday that someone in the village had stolen a chicken. She thinks about her sister, who died giving birth last year. And she wonders what it would be like to ride in one of those boats the officials use, long and sleek, floating down the Nile with white sails. By the time the dough is ready, the sky is turning gold. Her husband is already gone, his tools slung over his shoulder. The oxen pull the plow, breaking up the soil near the river. Sitra won't see him again until sunset, maybe later if he stops to drink with the others. Her boys wake up now. They're hungry, of course. She gives them bread and honey if they're lucky. Some mornings it's just bread and a little water. They eat quickly and run outside to help with chores. One feeds the chickens. The other gathers sticks for the oven. Neither complains. After breakfast, Sitra walks to the well. It's not far, but the water is heavy. She balances the pot on her head, careful not to spill. On the way back, she stops to chat with her friend Hennet. They talk about the heat, about the children, about a strange noise they heard last night. Maybe jackals. Maybe worse. Hennet is older, her back curved like a question mark, but her voice is still sharp. "Did you hear about the temple boy?" she asks. Sitra shakes her head. "Taken. Just vanished. They say he angered the gods." Sitra frowns, but says nothing. People always say things like that when someone disappears. She doesn't believe it's the gods. She believes it's something else, though she's not sure what. And as she walks back to her home, her shoulders aching from the weight of the pot, she feels a little colder than before, despite the rising sun. By midday, the heat is punishing. The children are resting now in the shade. Sitra is weaving baskets near the doorway, her hands moving quickly, almost without thinking. The air smells like sweat, grain, and dust. Somewhere a flute is playing. Someone is singing. Life moves slowly here, like the Nile itself. She thinks about the festivals coming soon. There will be dancing, food, music. Priests will walk in procession, carrying statues of the gods. Maybe she'll get to visit the city, see the temple, watch the sacred boats glide through the water. That's always the best part, the boats. Like magic, they carry the gods through the streets, and people throw flowers and clap and shout praises. But not everyone is allowed to go. Not everyone belongs in those grand temples. Not everyone is welcome. Sometimes she wonders what would happen if she tried to enter the temple's inner sanctum. Just once. Just to see it. Would she be struck down? Or would the gods ignore her completely? The thought stays with her all afternoon. When the sun begins to dip, she starts preparing dinner. More bread. Maybe lentils. Maybe a few dried fish if Hori was lucky at the docks. She works quietly, watching the shadows stretch across the walls. The boys are back inside now, chasing each other with bits of straw. One trips and falls, but gets back up without a sound. Citra smiles to herself. She thinks of her father, long gone now. He used to say that life is like the floodwaters, sometimes calm, sometimes full of force. But you don't fight the river, he'd say. You learn to float. By nightfall, the house is quiet. Hori returns, tired and sunburned. He eats in silence, then lies down to rest. The stars come out, one by one, blinking through the haze. Somewhere far off, dogs are barking. Somewhere even farther, the priests are chanting. Citra lies awake, staring at the ceiling. She thinks about the temple boy again, about the strange sound last night, about the things Hennet said. And suddenly, she hears something faint like whispering coming from outside. She sits up. The boys are asleep. Hori is snoring. The whispering continues. She steps outside. The air is cooler now, but the whispering is louder. Not voices, not wind, something else. She follows the sound, her bare feet pressing into the dirt. And then, she sees it, near the edge of the village, where the date palms sway gently in the moonlight. Something is moving, slowly, like it's gliding. Not walking, not crawling, just moving. It pauses near the old well, the one that hasn't been used in years. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it's gone. Citra doesn't move. She doesn't breathe. The whispering fades, and she knows something isn't right. But what could it be? The gods? A curse? Or something far older? The next day, everything will look the same. The sun will rise. Bread will be made. Fields will be plowed. But something has shifted in the silence of the night. And soon, Citra will find out just how much a single moment can change everything. But for now, in the stillness of ancient Egypt, we wait. The next morning, the sky glows soft and hazy, as if nothing happened. As if the night hadn't whispered. As if the thing by the well was just a dream. But Citra can't shake it. She goes through her usual routine, grinding the grain, feeding the boys, brushing the dust from the doorway. But everything feels slightly off. The air seems thicker, the silence heavier. Hori notices nothing. He leaves with the oxen like always, barely speaking. The children argue about who gets the bigger piece of bread, like always. But Citra keeps glancing toward the edge of the village, toward the old well. Hennet passes by just as the sun climbs over the houses. Citra calls her over. They sit in the shade, their baskets in their laps, fingers weaving patterns while their eyes stay sharp. I saw something, Citra finally says, keeping her voice low. Hennet raises an eyebrow. What kind of something? By the old well. Last night, Hennet stops weaving. Citra waits. Finally, Hennet speaks, her voice slow. You're not the first one to say that. Citra's heart jumps. They say there are things in this land older than our gods, older than the pyramids. Spirits, shadows, things that walk only when the moon is high. She leans closer. My grandmother told me stories. Said if you see one, you should never speak of it. Not until you know what it wants. Citra swallows hard. Then why are you telling me? Because Hennet says, if something's awake, we should know what it wants before it finds someone else. They sit in silence after that. Not long, but long enough for Citra to notice her own breath again. She finishes the basket. It's not her best work. One side is crooked and the weaving too tight, but she doesn't care. Her thoughts keep drifting back to the well. By midday, curiosity takes hold of her. She waits until the boys are asleep again, their small bodies sprawled across the floor in the heat. She grabs a jar of water, covers her head with a light shawl, and walks slowly toward the edge of the village. Each step feels like it echoes louder than it should. The well looks the same. Cracked stones, dried leaves, sand creeping in from all sides. It's been sealed for years after the new one was dug closer to the fields. No one uses this one anymore. It's too deep, too dark, too forgotten. Citra stands a few feet away, watching. Nothing moves. She edges closer. Still nothing. Then she hears it again. The whisper, barely more than a breath. She holds her breath. It stops. She kneels beside the stones and places a hand on the rim. The rock is warm. Dust clings to her fingers. She leans forward slightly, just enough to peer into the opening. Darkness stares back. It smells of old water, dry roots, and something else, something metallic. Suddenly, a gust of wind kicks up behind her, sending sand swirling into the air. She flinches and steps back, blinking through the grit. When she opens her eyes again, she sees a mark, barely visible, etched into the stone beside the well. A symbol, not a name, not a word. A circle with jagged lines through it. She's never seen anything like it. She runs her fingers across it. It's smooth, but sharp around the edges. Fresh, not worn down like the rest of the stones. Someone, or something, put it there recently. That night, she tells Hori. He laughs at first, thinks she's tired, thinks she's been listening to Hennet too much. But when she describes the mark, something shifts in his face. Just slightly. He tells her to leave it alone. Don't go back there, he says. Old places have old memories. Let them sleep. She wants to argue, but she doesn't. Instead, she lies awake again, listening to the night. The whispering doesn't come back, but the feeling does. The next day, while washing clothes by the river, she hears two women talking nearby. They're older, their skin like dried papyrus, their hands scarred from decades of work. They speak in hushed tones, but Citra catches words. Gone. Boy. Same as before. She walks over casually, pretending to wash the same cloth twice. Who's gone? She asks. The women look at each other. A potter's boy. From the edge of town. Didn't come home last night. His mother's been asking around. Citra feels her stomach drop. Another one. She asks about the symbol. Describes it in detail. One of the women goes pale. Don't talk of that, she snaps. Not here. Not where it can't hear you. Where what can hear me? Citra asks. The woman lowers her voice. There are names we don't speak. Things that belong to the time before the gods. The time of sand and bone. Citra doesn't understand. Not fully. But she understands enough to know that the old well isn't just old. That night, she doesn't sleep at all. She sits by the doorway, listening. The village is quiet. Even dogs are silent. Then, just after midnight, she hears it. Not a whisper this time. A sob. Soft. Broken. A child's sob. She stands slowly. Steps outside. Walks toward the sound. It's coming from the well. She doesn't run. She doesn't call for help. She just walks, slow and careful, like her feet are remembering a path older than memory. When she reaches the well, she sees him. A boy. Thin. Covered in dust. Standing perfectly still. But something's wrong. His eyes. They're empty. Not scared. Not sad. Just blank. He lifts one hand. Points at her. Then vanishes. Not runs. Vanishes. Like smoke and wind. Citra gasps and steps back. Her hands shake. Her knees nearly give out. She doesn't know how long she stands there. Eventually, the sky starts to lighten. Birds begin to call. The world wakes up again. But Citra doesn't move. Because now she knows something for certain. Whatever is in that well is not done yet. And soon, it will reach beyond the stones, beyond the village, beyond the fields. It has already started. And no one, not even the priests in Thebes, seem to know how to stop it. But maybe someone else does. Someone who vanished long ago. Someone the stories forgot. And if Citra wants to protect her family, if she wants to survive, she will have to remember a story the gods try to bury. One that begins in the sand and ends in silence. The following morning, Citra doesn't tell anyone what she saw. Not her husband, not Hennet, not the old women by the river. She doesn't even mention it to the boys, though they look at her with curiosity as she sits staring at her grinding stone, not moving. The morning feels thick, like the air itself is holding its breath. Life in the village goes on, as it always does. Shouting from the fields, laughter from the children, smoke from the clay ovens curling into the sky. But Citra feels outside of it all, like she's watching it from a distance, even though she's still right there. The image of the boy pointing at her haunts her. That hollow look, the way he vanished like mist. She can't explain it, not even to herself. It was real as anything. And that mark on the stone, fresh, sharp, strange, she can still feel on her fingertips. She wants to believe it means nothing. A prank, a dream, anything ordinary. But deep down, she knows better. By mid-morning, she finds herself walking again. Not toward the fields or the market, but toward the river. Her feet move without thinking, like something is pulling her. Not panic, not fear, curiosity, or maybe something older, something woven into her blood. She doesn't go alone. This time, she brings her youngest son, Minna. He's 6, small for his age, but sharp-eyed and quiet. He walks beside her holding her hand, chewing a bit of flatbread. "Where are we going?" he asks. She doesn't answer at first. Then, quietly, to see the scribes. The scribe's house sits near the edge of the village, not far from where the farmland meets the papyrus marshes. It's made of whitewashed mud brick, bigger than most homes, with painted symbols along the doorway. Scribes are respected, even feared in some ways. They know how to write, how to read, how to keep records, and tell stories that no one else understands. The man she's looking for is old, older than most in the village. His name is Panassi. His back is bent and his eyes clouded, but he remembers things no one else does. He speaks in half sentences and sometimes forgets what day it is, but the priests still consult him from time to time when a symbol appears they don't recognize. When Citra knocks, it's his daughter who answers. A lean woman with sharp cheekbones and ink-stained fingers. She looks surprised to see Citra. "I need to ask your father something," Citra says, shifting awkwardly. The woman hesitates, then steps aside. Panassi is sitting in the corner of the room, hunched over a piece of linen, tracing faded symbols with his finger. He doesn't look up when they enter. "I saw something near the old well," Citra begins. "A mark. A boy." That makes him glance up. "What kind of mark?" Citra kneels and draws in the dust, a circle with jagged lines through it. Panassi stares at it for a long time. Then he says, softly, "That shouldn't be here." Citra leans closer. "Do you know what it means?" The old man nods. "It's a ward, or a warning. Maybe both." "A warning for what?" Panassi's voice lowers until it's barely a whisper. "There are things buried before the desert had names, before the Nile found its path. Things the gods turned their faces from. Some say they sleep. Others say they wait." Citra feels Minna tighten his grip on her hand. Panassi continues. "That symbol was used in the early dynasties, before the temples we know now, before Thebes. It marked places where the dead did not rest." Citra shivers. "You say you saw a boy," he adds. She nods. Panassi closes his eyes and speaks, as if from memory. "When the floodwaters rose and fell, the people would sometimes hear voices, children's voices, laughing, crying, and then they would vanish." Citra swallows hard. "What can I do?" Panassi shakes his head slowly. "Stay away from the well. That place it remembers. It may be remembering you now." That night, Citra doesn't leave the house. She makes the boys sleep close, closer than usual. She lights an oil lamp and keeps it burning long after Hori falls asleep. Outside, the night is still. No wind, no dogs barking, no whispering. But it's the silence that frightens her most. She doesn't sleep. At some point in the night, she hears movement. Not outside, inside. She sits up quickly. The boys are asleep. Hori is still. But someone or something is walking through the room. She freezes. And then she sees it. In the corner, near the oven, a figure stands. Small, thin, barefoot. It's the same boy. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He just looks at her, then slowly raises a hand and points toward the door. Citra finds herself rising, barefoot, stepping over the boys, silent as shadow. She doesn't understand why she's following. She just is. Outside, the moon is high. The boy walks ahead of her. Past the homes. Past the fields. Toward the marshes. Not the well. Somewhere else. Citra follows, her breath shallow. Her heart pounding. The reeds rustle gently as they pass. Frogs chirp and then fall silent. He stops near a collapsed wall, what might have once been part of an ancient storehouse. Stone blocks lie cracked and half buried in mud. The boy kneels beside one. Citra hesitates. He looks back at her, then places a hand on the stone. It shifts, just slightly. Citra walks forward. Her knees tremble. She places her own hand on the stone, presses down. It moves. Beneath it, buried in dark soil, she sees something glint. Metal. She reaches in and pulls it out slowly. A small amulet. A scarab, but unlike any she's ever seen. Its shell is carved with the same strange symbol from the well. The boy stands. He places his hand over his heart, then vanishes again. Citra stumbles back, holding the amulet. What is this? Why her? And what happens now that she's touched it? She stares down at the scarab, her hands shaking. And in that moment, the wind picks up again, dry, warm, full of sand, and whispers her name. Only her name. Citra. The air around her thickens. The moon dims, and the reed beds begin to rustle, not with frogs, but with something else. Something watching. Something waiting. She doesn't know yet what she's unleashed. But she knows this. The past isn't buried. Not here. Not in Egypt. Not in the land of old gods and older shadows. And tomorrow, the village will wake to find one more person missing. But it won't be Citra. Not yet. Citra didn't remember walking home. She woke just before dawn, sitting on the floor near the doorway, the amulet still clutched tightly in her hand. Her knees were coated in dry mud, her shawl torn at the corner. She blinked slowly, feeling the weight of the scarab in her palm, its strange symbol pressing into her skin like a brand. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream, but then she saw her footprints in the dust, leading back from the marsh. And the amulet, it was real, cold, solid, and ancient. Her first instinct was to hide it. She wrapped it in a cloth, tucked it inside a basket beneath a stack of woven mats, and said nothing. Not to her husband, not to the boys. She tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. She baked bread. She swept the floor. She fetched water from the new well, smiling at a neighbor as if her world hadn't shifted. But everything felt different. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully now, like it didn't want to wake whatever had been disturbed. Hori returned from the fields early that day. He was pale and silent, which wasn't like him. Normally, he came back with stories about the crops or the gossip among the men. But today, he just sat down, poured a cup of water, and stared at the floor. Citra sat beside him. What happened? He hesitated. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Beck, the potter's boy, they found him." Her heart froze. Where? In the marshes. By the stones. Same place where your sister used to go gathering reeds. Citra gripped the edge of the mat. What did they say happened? Nothing. His body was cold. No marks. But his mouth he swallowed. It was open like he was screaming, like something took his voice right out of him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. That night, Citra returned to the basket. She unwrapped the amulet and stared at it in the flickering lamplight. The scarab's surface was chipped in places, but the symbol remained sharp, etched deep into the metal, surrounded by tiny, faded hieroglyphs she couldn't read. She thought of the boy's empty eyes, of Panacee's words, of Hennet's warning. Was this thing a key? A lock? A message? She had no answers, only questions that grew heavier each time she breathed. She tucked the amulet into her dress and stepped outside. The village was quiet as always. But tonight, the silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. She walked through the darkness, past sleeping homes, toward the old well. The night smelled of wet earth and ash. The moon was thin and sharp like a blade. When she reached the edge of the village, she stopped and crouched behind a crumbled wall. She waited, listening. Then there was the whispering, faint, familiar, and then another sound. Footsteps, not hers, someone else. Two shadows moved near the well. She couldn't see their faces, but they were adults, men by the way they walked. They carried something between them, a wrapped bundle, heavy. They didn't speak. They placed the bundle beside the well, and one of them began to trace something into the dirt with a stick. The symbol, the same one from the amulet. Citra's breath caught in her throat. The men stood still for a long time. Then one of them threw something into the well, metal, maybe. It clanged as it bounced off the stones. The other man muttered a prayer, one she didn't recognize. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into the night. Citra stayed frozen for what felt like forever. When she was sure they were gone, she stepped out slowly, heart pounding. She crept to the well and looked at the bundle they had left. She knelt and pulled back the edge of the cloth. A doll, just a child's doll, handmade, stuffed with straw, its face painted with care. But its eyes had been gouged out. She staggered back, heart racing, while rising in her throat. Suddenly, the amulet in her dress began to warm. She reached for it, pulling it out into the open air. It was glowing, just faintly like the last ember of a fire. And in the well, the whispering grew louder. She backed away slowly. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a curse or a legend. It was something alive, something that people in the village knew about. People who were feeding it, containing it, worshipping it, or worse, afraid of it. When she returned home, the house was still. Hori was asleep, and the boys were snoring softly. But Minna stirred as she passed. "Mother," he whispered. She sat beside him, brushing hair from his forehead. "Go back to sleep." But he looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "I saw the boy again," he said softly. Her blood turned cold. "In my dream." He said it's getting closer. Citra didn't answer. She just held him close. The next day, she returned to Panassi. This time, she showed him the amulet. His hands trembled as he held it. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "I followed the boy." Panassi shook his head. "You shouldn't have taken it. These things, they remember who touches them. Who carries them? What is it?" Citra asked. "What does it want?" Panassi looked up slowly. "It's not a what," he said. "It's a when." She stared at him, confused. Panassi sighed, like a man about to tell a story that should have never been remembered. There was a time, before Osiris, before the sky had a name. In that time, there were beings who ruled the Black Lands. Not gods, not men. Something in between. They didn't need temples. They didn't need worship. They fed on memory, on grief, on silence. And one day, they were buried, sealed beneath stone and river and name. And this amulet, it's a marker, a token. Those who find it are pulled into its echo. It shows itself to the ones it chooses. Citra's hands were damp with sweat. "And what does it want from me?" Panassi's eyes were full of sorrow. "To remember, so that it can return." She left without another word. As she walked back through the village, the air felt heavy. People moved quietly. Eyes darted behind closed shutters. Everyone seemed to know something was wrong, but no one dared speak it. Later that evening, Hennet came to her house. She didn't knock, just walked in and sat down, face pale. "There's another one gone," she said. "A girl this time. Nani's daughter." Citra closed her eyes. Hennet looked at her. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Citra nodded. Hennet took her hand. "Then it's too late to stop it. But maybe not too late to understand it." "Understand what?" Hennet leaned closer, her voice shaking. "This isn't the first time this has happened. My grandmother told me the story. She said it happens every few generations. The ground cracks. The air grows quiet. And something ancient wakes up." Citra gripped her arm. "What did they do before?" Hennet's voice was barely audible. "They buried it deeper. And they made sure the one who touched it never spoke again." Outside, the wind rose suddenly, sending dust skimming across the village paths. And in the distance, from deep within the earth, the well began to whisper. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder as the sun set that night, rising from the well like steam after rain. Citra heard them from inside her house, through the thick walls and closed shutters. She sat on the floor with the amulet in her lap, her hands trembling. The boys were asleep, curled against each other on their mat. Hori was out late, helping a neighbor with irrigation near the river. She was alone, or at least she should have been. The light from the oil lamp flickered, not from wind, There was none, but from something heavier in the air. A pressure, like the moment before a storm, when everything holds still. She wanted to leave the amulet behind, bury it, maybe even throw it back into the marsh where it came from. But every time she thought about parting with it, her chest tightened. It was like it had already taken root inside her. She could still hear the boy's voice in her mind. Not loud, not even clear, just pieces. A name, a sound, something about opening or remembering. The next morning, the village was different. People moved quietly. Conversations stopped when she walked by. The children didn't laugh or chase each other through the narrow paths. Even the animals were restless. Dogs paced in circles, chickens refused to leave their pens, and the oxen moaned deep into the earth. Citra noticed all of it, and so did Hennet. "They know," Hennet said in a low voice as they walked together to the well. "Not the old one, the new one, the safe one. Even if they won't admit it, they feel something has changed. Why won't they say anything? Because they're afraid it will hear them." Citra felt the amulet through her dress. It was warm again. That afternoon, she went back to Panacea one last time. The old scribe sat outside his home, staring at the horizon, a piece of folded linen clutched in his hands. "I remembered something," he said before she could speak. "I wasn't supposed to, but it came to me in the night." He handed her the linen. It was brittle with age, ink fading, corners torn. But the symbol in the center was clear, almost identical to the one on the amulet. And beneath it, a single line written in trembling script. "When the scarab awakens, the soil must sleep." "What does that mean?" Citra asked, her voice quiet. Panacea didn't look at her. "It means this land, our land, was once silenced by force. The scarab was the last warning. A mark not for humans, but for what lies beneath." She stared at the words. "You think it's alive?" "I think it remembers," Panacea said. "And memory can be more dangerous than any weapon." That night, she dreamed of water. Dark water. Not the Nile, not the well, deeper. Black and slow. She floated just beneath its surface, unable to move, unable to breathe. Around her were faces, hundreds of them, some familiar, some ancient, all whispering the same word. Over and over again. "Return." She woke gasping. Outside, the air was thick with dust. The moon glowed red, too low in the sky, and the well was whispering again, this time louder than ever. The sound rolled across the village like smoke, slipping under doors, crawling into dreams. Menace sat up beside her. "Mother," he said, his voice hollow. "It's coming." She held him close, brushing his hair back with shaking fingers. "I know." By the next morning, 3 more people were gone. A fisherman, his wife, and their baby daughter. No one spoke of it. No one searched. It was as if their names had been erased. Hori noticed the change in her. He asked what she was hiding. She tried to tell him, piece by piece, but the words sounded too strange out loud. How do you explain a whisper that isn't a voice, or a child who vanishes like wind? He didn't believe her. Not at first. Not until he saw the mark. It was on the door of their home, carved into the wood in the night. The same circle, the same jagged lines. That night, Hori sat awake with her, holding a dull blade in one hand. He didn't speak much, just stared at the door. Every so often, he looked at the boys to make sure they were still breathing. Citra didn't sleep at all. She thought back to her childhood, to the stories her mother used to tell by firelight. Most were harmless, tales of talking animals, clever gods, love that defied death. But one story had always unsettled her. The story of the place where the dead whispered from under the ground. A place you weren't supposed to say out loud. A place where silence grew like a tree, fed by names forgotten. At the time, she thought it was nonsense. A bedtime warning. But now, she was starting to wonder if those stories were never fiction. Just history people didn't dare remember. By the 3rd day, a fog rolled in from the east. Not a natural fog. It didn't smell of water or river mist. It smelled of stone, copper, and old earth. It clung to the skin. It coated the trees. It made people stay indoors, whispering behind closed doors, their faces pale. That morning, Citra found Hennet waiting at her door. "I've seen this before," she said simply. "When I was a girl. It lasted 3 nights. And then the temple caught fire." "Did it stop after that?" "No," Hennet said. It just went quiet for a while. Citra felt the weight of the amulet again. She hadn't touched it since the night she dreamed of the dark water. But now she pulled it out, letting it catch the dim light. It pulsed, not with heat, with breath. The scarab was breathing. Hennet stepped back. "What do I do with it?" Citra asked. "You can't destroy it," Hennet said, "and you can't give it away. It chose you. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does." That evening, Panacea sent a message, a scrap of papyrus delivered by his daughter. It read, "There's one place where it can be spoken, where the memory can be sealed again. But it is far, and the way is dangerous. The temple beneath the sand, the one without name, asterisk asterisk." Citra didn't know what it meant, but she knew this: the time for waiting was over. The whispers were no longer just background noise. They were calling to her, and she was running out of time. The desert heat settled over the Nile Valley like a heavy blanket, yet life moved with steady rhythm. As the sun climbed higher into the pale sky, its light spilled across narrow village alleys, busy courtyards, and quiet farming fields. In a small mud brick home tucked along the riverbank, a young boy named Dedi was already up, rubbing sleep from his eyes as his mother prepared breakfast. She handed him a small piece of barley bread, and he chewed slowly, not quite awake, but already aware of the chores that waited. Their lives were ordinary, which is to say, full of endless motion. Ancient Egypt wasn't a land of constant pharaohs and pyramids like many imagined. It was mostly fields, sweat, tools, and patience. Dedi's father, a farmer like most others, had left at dawn to tend the plots near the water's edge. The fields weren't just for growing food. They were survival. Barley, emmer wheat, flax, and lentils. Crops that fed mouths and built everything from cloth to beer. The soil, rich from a yearly flood, was their greatest treasure. But only if the flood came just right. Too little water, and they starved. Too much, and it washed everything away. Dedi's older sister, Merit, carried a basket to the nearby well, where she waited in line with other women, trading sleepy greetings and gossip. The well was shallow now, late in the season, but it was still enough. On the way home, she passed the house of Bakery the Potter, where smoke was already curling from the kiln. Inside, Bakery hunched over a wheel, spinning smooth, round pots with hands trained by decades. His apprentice, little more than a boy himself, sat nearby, smoothing damp clay with care. Their work was plain, but essential. Without pots, how could anyone store grain, water, oil, or anything? Life in the village followed a pattern. But hidden within that routine were stories, small mysteries, and moments of quiet tension. Like the strange visitor who had arrived the day before, a man no one knew, dressed in travel-worn linen, carrying a scroll case under his arm. He hadn't spoken much. He had only asked for directions to the old temple ruins beyond the edge of town, where jackals roamed and the locals whispered about ghosts. The villagers assumed he was a scribe or maybe a priest. Dedi had seen him pass by their home, his steps quick and his eyes sharp, scanning the horizon as if he was being followed. Rumors grew fast in a village. Some thought the man was looking for something buried, something lost in the sand centuries ago. Others said he was a messenger from Thebes, carrying warnings about trouble in the south. Either way, he hadn't returned by nightfall, and by morning, the wind near the temple ruins had shifted strangely, cooler than usual, dry and whispering like breath through old stones. That morning, the temple was on everyone's mind, though few admitted it aloud. Most had never gone beyond the edge of its crumbled gates. Dedi, curious by nature, wanted to see it. He'd asked his mother, but she'd said no, not today, maybe not ever. Yet something about the visitor had stirred his imagination. Maybe the old temple wasn't just ruins. Maybe it still held something forgotten, something that made even a stranger from far away risk the journey. Back in the heart of the village, Cindy the weaver worked her loom. Her hands moved without thought, sliding the shuttle back and forth, the warp threads snapping softly with each pass. Beside her, a cat dozed in the shade, its ears twitching. Fabric was her world. Linen for robes, rough cloth for sails, and fine pieces for temples. Cindy hummed as she worked, but paused when she noticed her neighbor, Heezy, pacing near the edge of the market. He wasn't a man who paced. Heezy, a woodworker, usually spent his days carving chairs and chests, rarely talking. But this morning, something was wrong. He kept glancing up the road, leading from the river, as if waiting for someone who should have arrived by now. The grain barge, maybe? Or someone more personal. The delay weighed on him, and though he tried to hide it, others noticed. In a place where news traveled faster than the Nile current, even silence could mean something. Further upstream, the priests at the small local temple were preparing offerings. Incense filled the air, curling around columns that had seen centuries of devotion. One of the junior priests, a thin, serious boy named Nebu, was wiping dust from the stone altar when he noticed a mark, faint but fresh, scratched into the base of the statue. It wasn't writing exactly. It was a symbol, a half-circle with a single line running through it. Not one he recognized. He stared at it for a long moment before glancing over his shoulder. No one else seemed to notice. But Nebu felt it in his chest, a kind of pressure like someone had whispered his name. The village, like most of Egypt, lived on routine. Farmers sowed and harvested. Bakers kneaded dough and fired ovens before the sun rose too high. Children fetched water and played in the dust. But every now and then, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough to make people pause between footsteps or glance twice at a door they'd passed 100 times. Dedi, restless and still thinking of the stranger, wandered past the edge of the date palms toward the old stone path that curved near the hills. He knew he wasn't supposed to, but there was something pulling at him, not danger exactly, but not safety either. A question he couldn't answer. What had the man come looking for? And had he found it? As Dedi rounded the bend, he saw something in the sand. Footprints. Not just one set, too. One going to the ruins. One returning. The second set looked hurried. Deep prints, spaced unevenly. Whoever had walked them had been running. Dedi crouched down and pressed his fingers into the print. Still fresh. Still soft. The wind rose suddenly, tugging at his tunic. He looked up. In the distance, near the horizon where the hills met the sky, the outline of the ruined temple stood against the light. It looked smaller than he expected, more broken, but something about it felt alive. Not alive like a creature, but like a place that remembered everything. Back in the village, Merritt was helping her mother prepare lunch when she paused, holding a bundle of onions. "Where's Dedi?" she asked, suddenly aware of his absence. Their mother didn't look up. "He's probably with the goats," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Merritt set the onions down and stepped outside, scanning the narrow alleys. A strange feeling prickled her arms. Not fear, just uncertainty. The kind that lingers when something's not quite right. She walked down to the field edge, calling for him softly. No answer. Near the temple ruins, the air felt thicker. Dedi stood just inside the outer stones, his heart thudding fast, his eyes wide. The carvings on the wall were faded, almost lost to time, but here and there he could still see outlines. Figures, animals, stars. But one part had been scraped clean recently. The dust wasn't settled. Someone had been here, and they might still be. He turned at the sound of something behind him. A rustle, a whisper, or maybe just the wind. He couldn't tell. Then he saw it. A corner of parchment, half buried, near the altar stone. He knelt and reached for it, brushing away the sand. The parchment was brittle but intact. On it a drawing, a map, a symbol. It looked similar to what the young priest had seen carved into the temple column. Half circle, one line, and underneath it, faint but clear, a single word written in hieratic script. Awaken. Dedi stared at it, unsure what it meant. But deep inside, he felt something shift. Something old. Something waiting. By the time the sun crept a little higher into the Egyptian sky, the scent of baking bread floated through the air. Baskets filled with fresh barley loaves were stacked carefully by the door of each modest mud-brick home. In the homes of farmers and field workers, this marked the beginning of their labor. Children, often still yawning and rubbing sleep from their eyes, fetched water from the nearby canal or river. They balanced clay jars on their heads, just like their mothers and older siblings had taught them. It wasn't just a chore, It was survival. Water was life, and in Egypt, life always ran parallel to the Nile. Men began heading to the fields, their feet kicking up dry dust as they walked in groups. Sometimes they sang softly to make the journey easier, their words echoing songs passed down from their grandfathers. These weren't slaves. Most were regular workers bound to the land, tied to the rhythm of harvest and flood. When the Nile retreated after its yearly flood, it left behind rich black soil. In that soil grew wheat, barley, onions, flax, and lettuce. Each man had his task, from digging trenches for irrigation to planting rows of crops by hand. But while many toiled in the fields, others had different paths. Scribes, for instance, were treated with quiet respect. These were men who could write, who understood the ancient script that curved and curled like reeds in the river. They didn't sweat in the sun like the farmers, but they still worked hard, recording grain taxes, managing labor assignments, and keeping track of temple offerings. Some sat cross-legged near granaries, reed pens in hand, hunched over rolls of papyrus. Others wandered the village square, making notes as they observed trade or listened to local disputes. The markets were noisy by mid-morning. Traders called out in hoarse voices, waving linen scarves or flashing copper tools to get attention. Some booths sold fish straight from the river, their scales still glistening. Others offered baskets of dates, honeycomb, or jugs of beer. Egyptian beer wasn't like modern beer. It was thick, almost like porridge, and made from fermented bread. Children darted between stalls, pointing at sweets or toys carved from ivory. Mothers haggled over prices, weighing each purchase carefully, not just in cost, but in what it meant for the rest of the week's meals. The city centers, especially near places like Memphis or Thebes, were more chaotic. Here, stonecutters chipped away at limestone blocks meant for temples or tombs. You could hear the steady rhythm of hammers all day long, like a heartbeat of the city itself. The skilled artisans, painters, jewelers, sculptors, were deep into their projects. One man could spend weeks carving a single scene on a tomb wall, capturing a nobleman's journey through the afterlife. Another might sit in silence, threading tiny beads of lapis lazuli into a necklace meant for someone of high status. Inside the temples, priests moved like shadows, quiet and deliberate. They were responsible for keeping the gods pleased. That meant daily rituals, offerings of food, incense, and song. They bathed several times a day, wore fresh linen, and avoided impure acts. Temples weren't just religious centers. They were banks, schools, and places of law. They stored grain, hosted scholars, and advised officials. Even the pharaoh's decrees often passed through temple hands before reaching the common people. Women's lives were just as layered. While most managed households, many worked, some as weavers, others as musicians or dancers for temple ceremonies. Wealthier women had more freedom and sometimes owned businesses or managed estates. Some acted as priestesses, performing sacred rites with grace and discipline. One such woman, named Neferu, had her name whispered with admiration through the alleyways of her town. It wasn't just her beauty. It was her knowledge of herbs, her ability to read omens in the sky, and the way she made even skeptical men pause and listen. Evenings came slowly in Egypt. The air cooled just enough to make sitting outside pleasant. Families gathered near their homes, eating meals of bread, lentils, and whatever they could afford. Maybe some fish or duck if they were lucky. Fires crackled softly, and conversations drifted like smoke. Stories were told, not just to entertain, but to teach. Children listened wide-eyed to tales of gods walking among men, of pharaohs who ruled with justice, and of spirits who haunted the desert sands. Not everything was peaceful, though. Just beneath the surface of everyday life, there was tension. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. Some people spoke of missing workers, men who left for royal projects and never returned. Others murmured about rising grain taxes or harsh overseers in the fields. Sometimes a noble's greed left a village with little to eat. At other times, floods were too weak or too strong, destroying crops and sparking quiet panic. The scribes noticed these shifts. So did the priests. And in the palace, behind carved doors and golden columns. The pharaoh's advisors kept records of all of it. But not everything was written down. Some stories, especially the ones that challenged the official version of things, were passed down only by word of mouth. Stories of workers who secretly plotted against cruel foremen, or villagers who saw strange lights in the sky and claimed it was the gods sending warnings. Most people shrugged off such tales, but not everyone. There was a man named Kinmu who had once worked on a noble's estate. He was older now, with skin like tan leather and a voice that creaked like dry reeds. He had seen things, odd things, that he didn't speak of unless the listener had earned his trust. Some nights, under the stars, he would talk softly about what he saw during his years managing grain stores and collecting harvests. One story, in particular, stuck with him. A day when the Nile turned a strange color and the temple priests went silent for weeks afterward. No records were kept. No one dared mention it openly. But Kimma swore he remembered. And now, years later, the younger generation had begun to wonder about those forgotten moments. The smallest events, a faded carving on a broken statue, an unusually silent priest, or a field left uncultivated, carried secrets that didn't make it into scrolls or temple records. Secrets buried beneath layers of sand, time, and fear. As the moon rose, casting silver light on the rooftops, the city of Wazit slept. But not everyone was at peace. In the dark corners of temples and in the quiet spaces between homes, people dreamed dreams that didn't make sense, of gods they hadn't heard of voices whispering from the Nile's depths, of a different truth that hadn't been spoken aloud in generations. And somewhere, a group of travelers prepared to leave their village before dawn. They weren't merchants. They weren't farmers. They carried nothing but tools, ink, and a map whose edges were burned and torn. They were searching for something, a forgotten chamber, a sealed scroll, maybe a symbol hidden beneath a ruined temple wall. Something that could explain the strange tension hanging over their lives. Something that might finally reveal what had been buried for too long. The winds shifted that night, and for a moment, the silence wasn't silent at all. It felt like Egypt itself was holding its breath. At first light, bakery was already up. The air was still cool, and the scent of damp earth from the Nile breeze clung to the mud brick walls of his home. He sat silently on a low stool near the doorway, sipping barley beer, thin and sour, more nourishment than luxury. He could hear the faint sounds of the river lapping at the shore, the shuffle of neighbors waking up, and the first soft bleat of goats. These were the sounds of a normal day, the kind of morning that stretched back through time in the same rhythm for generations. But something didn't feel quite right. His son hadn't returned from the granary, and his wife was growing quiet with worry. Bakery lived in a workers' village on the edge of a quarry near Thebes, where most of the residents were craftsmen, stonemasons, and scribes. Though the pharaoh's projects kept everyone busy, there was an odd lull in the air recently, an unease no one wanted to say aloud. Some said it was because of the new tax collectors who had been spotted traveling up the Nile in gilded boats, questioning villagers and measuring fields. Others whispered it had to do with tomb robbers in the Valley of the Kings, which always brought harsh punishments and suspicion to even the most loyal citizens. As he walked to the nearby stonecutter's yard, Bakery glanced around and caught sight of his neighbor, Layla, a widow known for her sharp tongue and sharper eyes. She gave him a brief nod, but didn't smile, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Her daughter had fallen ill recently. Nothing unusual, just fever and chills, but the priest at the temple hadn't come by with his prayers. Too busy, he claimed, or maybe too frightened. Illness, superstition, silence. It all hung over the village like a net waiting to drop. The cutting yard was already alive with activity. Men stood in rows, chiseling blocks of limestone into perfect, rectangular shapes, destined for a new tomb wall deep in the cliffs. Bakery joined his assigned team and picked up his worn mallet and copper chisel. As he worked, his mind wandered. He thought of his son, always running off, more curious than obedient. Yesterday, the boy had asked about the secret tunnels under the storage houses. Bakery dismissed it as childhood fantasy, but now he wasn't so sure. The old priest, Amenhotep, used to speak of hidden paths only the gods and scribes knew about. What if the boy had gone looking? By mid-morning, the sun was blazing. Dust clung to Bakery's skin, and his muscles ached. The rhythm of his chisel helped distract him from his thoughts. But then he noticed something unusual. Sahu, the royal scribe assigned to monitor the site, was missing. The scribe never missed a shift. He was arrogant, always reminding everyone that his pen was more powerful than any hammer, and he enjoyed recording every small error as if it gave him purpose. His absence was not a blessing, it was a red flag. People began to whisper. During the midday break, Bakery sat with two other workers under a narrow patch of shade. One of them, an older man named KB, leaned in and spoke in a hushed voice. The scribe was asking too many questions. About who gets what food. About who talks to the priests. You know what that means. Bakery frowned. You think he found something? I think he found someone, KB replied grimly. And maybe he shouldn't have. That night, Bakery's wife lit a tiny oil lamp and laid out offerings on their family shrine, bread, onions, and a pinch of salt. She whispered prayers to the household gods and asked for protection. But neither of them said what they were thinking. Their son was still missing. Sahu had vanished, and something was stirring among the workers that felt bigger than both problems combined. In the days that followed, other small things began to go wrong. A storage building near the canal was found half-flooded. Someone had forgotten to close the sluice gates. A grain record disappeared from the ledger kept in the temple storehouse. One of the guards who patrolled the workers' quarters at night fell from the scaffolding and broke his leg. Some said he was pushed. But no one could prove anything, and more importantly, no one wanted to. Then, Layla came to Bakery's door just after dusk, carrying a scrap of linen folded tightly in her hand. She said she found it near the shrine ruins at the edge of the village, where children were forbidden to play. Inside the cloth was a small wax tablet, covered in crude writing. It wasn't written by a trained scribe. The strokes were uneven, rushed, but the message was clear. Asterisk, they're watching. We found the chamber. It's real. Do not tell them. Asterisk. Bakery's heart sank. The boy had been talking about secret chambers for weeks. He thought it was a game. Now he wasn't sure. That night, Bakery couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in their home's walls. He remembered stories from his childhood about priests who buried truths beneath the sand, gods who punished curiosity, and tombs cursed to keep secrets. Maybe it wasn't just superstition. Maybe some knowledge was never meant for ordinary men. Or maybe, just maybe, the danger wasn't supernatural, it was human. The next morning, Bakery visited the overseer under the pretense of asking for extra tools. But the conversation quickly turned. The overseer, a gruff man with sunburnt skin and suspicious eyes, asked Bakery a strange question. Has your boy said anything strange to you lately? About the granary? About tunnels? Bakery hesitated. No, he's just a child. The overseer narrowed his gaze. Children see things. We all know that. But they don't always understand what they see. And sometimes they talk too much. That was it. The warning wasn't subtle. Bakery thanked him and left quickly, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know who was listening anymore. He didn't know who was watching. Later that evening, Layla knocked on his door again, this time looking pale. Her daughter had wandered too far from home and claimed she saw Sahu, the missing scribe, near the burial cliffs, wrapped in dark robes, carrying a scroll case. The girl said his eyes looked strange, not like before, not human. Layla was terrified, not just of the scribe, but of what he might be guarding or hiding or protecting. Bakery's mind swirled with questions. Why would a scribe fake his disappearance? Why would his son write a message about a chamber? Why did the overseer seem to already know about it? What was beneath the earth that had people whispering in corners and priests turning away from their duties? He couldn't stay silent anymore, but he also couldn't act without knowing more. So that night, when the village was asleep and the moon hung low over the desert, Bakery grabbed a torch, slipped through the narrow alleys, and crept toward the old shrine ruins. Somewhere down in the forgotten cracks of the earth, his son's secrets waited. And Bakery knew that whatever he found, truth or myth, gods or greed, would change everything. He just didn't know yet if he'd survive it. By the time the sun reached its peak, casting short shadows and making the whitewashed mud brick homes shimmer with heat, life in the ancient Egyptian village had settled into a rhythm. Women gathered at communal ovens, slapping dough into flat discs and sliding them carefully into the glowing embers. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the air, mixing with the smoky scent of oil lamps and sweat. Children no longer chased each other. Most had been summoned back home to help their mothers or to take brief midday rest from the heat. But not all rested. Some continued to work in silence, the way generations before them had done, without questioning why. Inside the weaving hut, Hori's sister, Iset, worked her loom. The rhythmic clack and pull echoed like a heartbeat. She didn't mind the repetition. She found peace in the threads. Her fingers moved quickly, skillfully weaving linen cloth, pausing only to glance at her little brother, Kapa, who was sleeping in a corner with his thumb in his mouth. Their mother had gone to visit a neighbor who claimed to know a new method to dye linen with crushed pomegranate skins. Everyone in the village was always looking for ways to make things last longer, work faster, or stand out more at market. Not far from the weaving hut, a scribe named Bach led a group of young boys under the shade of a fig tree. They were sprawled on mats, squinting at faded papyrus scrolls and wooden writing boards. One clumsy boy accidentally snapped his reed pen and earned a sharp glance for Bach. "If you can't handle the pen, you'll be hauling bricks," he muttered, though without cruelty. Being a scribe was an honored position, one that freed you from the backbreaking labor of the fields and quarries. But the training was long, and not everyone succeeded. Some boys in Bach's class came from modest families who scraped together enough to pay for lessons, hoping education would pull their sons into better lives. Others were sons of temple workers, whose fathers expected them to follow in their ink-stained footsteps. Bach often reminded his students, "Words are more powerful than swords. With them, we record kings and condemn traitors." His words had weight, but none of the boys understood them just yet. They were too busy trying to remember the right way to draw a falcon or a bull, or how many reeds to use for the sound. Hieroglyphs were beautiful but unforgiving. In the distance, a group of men in plain linen kilts were digging irrigation channels, grunting with each shovel of packed earth. The Nile had receded slightly, and the water had to be redirected to keep the farmlands moist. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept bellies full and taxes paid. One of the men, a broad-shouldered fellow named Mena, wiped his brow and looked toward the horizon. The temple walls shimmered in the heat, their towering structures casting long, watchful shadows. Inside the temple complex, life moved with different priorities. High priests walked slowly, their heads shaved and their linen robes more refined, almost translucent. Incense burned in every corner. The smell was sweet and strange. Offerings of bread, beer, and fruit were being arranged before a golden statue of the falcon-headed god Horus. Acolytes whispered prayers and chants, their voices rising and falling like the river tide. Nefret, a young woman working as a water-bearer for the temple staff, kept her eyes low as she passed the inner chamber. She'd never been allowed beyond its massive stone doorway. Only the highest priest could enter. They claimed it was for the protection of the people, but everyone in the village whispered that the truth was more complicated. Some believed treasures were hidden there, brought from lands beyond the desert. Others said the priests stored knowledge, scrolls from foreign lands that revealed things too dangerous for common folk to understand. Nefret didn't care for stories. She only cared that her younger brother had been sick for days and that the priests, despite her mother's desperate offerings, still hadn't sent someone to bless their home. She believed in the gods, yes, but she'd started wondering whether the people who claimed to serve them really listened. She filled her jug and turned to leave, carefully balancing the clay vessel on her head. Her bare feet padded silently across the stone floor. Back in the village, the shadows began to grow longer. Farmers returned with dusty legs and aching backs. Smoke from cooking fires rose lazily into the sky. It was a time for quiet, for stories, and for the sharing of the day's burdens. Hori's grandfather sat cross-legged by the entrance of their home, carving a small wooden cat figurine for little Kapa. His hands were steady, despite his age, and his eyes twinkled when the shape began to emerge from the soft wood. He spoke aloud, more to himself than to anyone else. In the old days, they say the gods walked among us. The sun didn't rise without their blessing. Now we give offerings and hope for rain. But the gods, they don't speak like they used to. His voice trailed off, and he began humming an old song, one that Hori recognized from years of hearing it in fragments but never knew the words to. That night, as the stars began to shimmer over the Nile and frogs croaked from the reeds, the village settled into stillness. But not everyone slept easily. A whisper had started moving through the streets like wind slipping through cracks. Some said a tomb had been found upriver. Not just any tomb, but one belonging to a royal scribe who had vanished during the reign of a forgotten pharaoh. The story came from a trader who'd arrived 2 days earlier, his donkey loaded with baskets and spices, and his tongue loaded with gossip. According to him, the tomb had strange symbols on the walls. Not just hieroglyphs, but something older. Symbols that didn't match anything in the temples. He said those who went inside came out changed. Silent. Pale. One man lost the ability to speak entirely. Another ran off into the desert, muttering about voices under the ground. No one knew if it was true, but that didn't stop people from talking. Hori lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his family's small home. He hadn't told anyone, not even Iset, but he'd overheard something when helping a traveling inspector clean his scroll case near the docks last week. A scribe's name, long forgotten, had been mentioned, and a curse, one tied to a secret chamber hidden under a collapsed pyramid outside the city. The inspector had spoken in hushed tones, and when he caught Hori listening, he barked at him to leave. But that name, Sayaho, kept returning in Hori's thoughts. He'd never heard it before, yet it felt oddly familiar, like something whispered in a dream. He rolled onto his side, eyes heavy but heart unsettled. The stars outside blinked silently, unaware of the storm slowly building beneath them. Somewhere far from the village, a lone figure walked across the sand. His robe was torn, his feet blistered, and he carried a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside the bundle, something pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, though no creature stirred within. The man muttered the same phrase over and over. "The door is opening. The door is opening." But no one heard him. Not yet. A pot clanged in the distance, a reminder that even the smallest sounds could punctuate the stillness of an ancient Egyptian afternoon. As the sun dropped ever so slightly lower in the sky, families began to retreat indoors. The whitewashed, mud-brick houses, modest and functional, provided much-needed relief from the glare. Inside one such home, a young boy named Perry sat cross-legged on the floor beside his grandmother. The light filtered through a narrow slit in the wall, casting lines across the cool stone floor. She was weaving a reed mat, her fingers moving with a slow rhythm that seemed almost eternal. "Grandmother," Perry asked, tilting his head, "what did the gods do when they rested? Did they have afternoons like us?" She smiled faintly, not looking up from her work. "The gods don't rest, little one, but they watch, always watching, even when we think we're forgotten." That idea lingered with him, just like the stories his father used to tell after long days hauling stone for the tomb builders. The gods weren't distant to the Egyptians. They were here, present in every crack of sunlight, every breeze off the Nile. And though the gods seemed constant, Perry began to notice that people were not. Change, though slow like the river, was coming. The Nile, once a symbol of life and stability, had been low last season. The elders whispered about it, muttering concerns beneath their breath, as if speaking too loudly would make the drought worse. Temples offered prayers and sacrifices, but even the priests seemed uncertain now. A bad flood season didn't just mean thinner crops. It meant less beer, less bread, less trade. It meant hungrier children and more pressure on workers who were already giving more than their share. Tipa, Perry's mother, had started skipping her portions to feed the children. She worked in the granaries, a position that gave her some access to surplus when the season was good. But now, every crumb was counted. Every jug of grain was watched. In the heart of the village, near the edge of a courtyard shaded by palms, a potter named Amenhotep sat on a low stool, turning his wheel slowly. The shape forming under his hands wasn't meant for decoration or display, but for carrying water, practical, needed. Yet his hands hesitated. He looked out toward the fields where the men were returning early again. That wasn't a good sign. Work didn't stop before sunset unless something was wrong. Sure enough, the news came shortly after. A messenger on foot, dusty and panting, arrived from a nearby estate. A temple storehouse had been broken into. Nothing grand had been taken, no gold, no idols. Just food, barley, dried dates, dried fish, enough to feed a family, or maybe more. Whispers spread faster than the messenger's breath could return. Some saw it as blasphemy. Others, especially among the laborers, whispered a different word: desperation. Rhea, the weaver whose sons hauled stones upriver, voiced what others dared not. They weren't stealing from gods. They were taking what should have been theirs in the first place. That was a dangerous thought. Temple scribes had recorded offerings for years. Tallies and ledgers, all precise, but to the common people, those scrolls meant little. What mattered was what ended up on their table, and more often, it was less than what they gave. It was then that subplots started to form. People began asking quiet questions, mostly in corners, often after dark. Who really controlled the flow of food from the temples? Why did the priests grow fatter when the floods grew thinner? Why did those who worked hardest have the least say? No one dared speak against Pharaoh, of course. That would have been treason, unthinkable. But the local officials? The overseers? The priests in their crisp linen and perfumed collars? They were not divine, and people were beginning to remember that. Meanwhile, a scribe named Minka, who lived just outside the temple walls, had begun keeping his own private records. At first, it was simply a habit. He loved numbers, patterns, the beauty of order. But soon he noticed a strange thing. The offerings recorded as delivered to the gods were not matching what was stored in the granaries. A difference of 10 measures here, 5 there. Small amounts, but over weeks and months, they added up. He didn't speak of it immediately. After all, scribes weren't known for bravery. But curiosity gnawed at him, sharper than any fear. He began asking quiet questions of his own, posing as if he were double-checking his scrolls. Most brushed him off. A few narrowed their eyes. And one day, someone left a reed basket at his door. Inside, a broken seal from the temple, and a handful of dried fish, just like those stolen in the break-in. A warning, or maybe an invitation. In the same week, a young girl named Looney overheard her father arguing with a trader near the docks. Looney, barely 12, wasn't supposed to be listening. But like many children in the village, she knew when something important was happening. The trader was accusing her father, who worked hauling cargo to boats, of skimming off goods, adding small weights to his scales. Her father denied it, but Looney saw the fear in his eyes. Not guilt, fear of being caught. That night, as her family slept, she walked to the river and sat beneath a fig tree, listening to the water lapping against the banks. The stars above seemed closer than usual. She didn't know why she felt it, but something was shifting, like a quiet tension waiting to crack open. Far off in the distance, across the river where richer estates lined the banks, torches moved through the trees. Nobles returning from hunting trips. Their laughter echoed faintly, out of sync with the heaviness in the village. To them, Egypt still flowed in gold and honey. But for the villagers, it flowed in sweat and sacrifice. The conflict wasn't explosive. Not yet. But it was spreading like roots beneath the soil. Every pot passed with less grain. Every shoulder leaned harder into every stone. Every child heard more whispered words their parents hoped they didn't understand. Even in the temples, young priests whispered to each other when the elders weren't listening. Was this truly the will of the gods? Or were they preserving a system that no longer served the people? The line between worship and survival was blurring. And through it all, the sun continued its journey over the desert, indifferent to human struggle. The Nile kept flowing. But beneath the calm surface of Egypt's daily life, something ancient and quiet was beginning to stir. A choice, unspoken but inevitable, hung in the air. Accept the weight of tradition, or ask whether all the rituals still serve the living. For the first time in a long time, some are beginning to wonder what else might lie beyond the expected. What other paths life could take. What stories history would choose to forget or remember. And as the stars brightened above thatched roofs and temple spires, the people of Egypt, farmers, children, scribes, traders, potters, found themselves slowly waking to questions they'd never dared ask before. Questions that had no clear answers. Not yet. The sun had begun its slow crawl back down the sky, casting long shadows over the narrow, winding alleys between mud-brick homes. A soft, amber glow settled across the village rooftops as the air cooled ever so slightly. Children's laughter drifted faintly over the walls, while women poured the last of their wash water into small garden plots. A flock of ibises flew overhead, their silhouettes graceful and silent. The Nile flowed calmly nearby, a giant that had both nurtured and destroyed for centuries. But in the quiet folds of daily life, something deeper stirred, unspoken tensions hidden in the routines. The rhythms of ancient Egyptian life might have looked peaceful from a distance, but up close, you could sense the pressures that lay just beneath the surface. Not everything was predictable. Not everyone was content. Tepi, a fisherman's daughter, had returned home that evening with dust in her sandals and a strange weight in her chest. She had seen something downriver, something that didn't fit into the usual world of baskets, nets, and woven reeds. It wasn't a crocodile or a capsized boat. It was a group of men, royal scribes, judging by their fine linen and dark, coal-lined eyes, measuring land that belonged to no one. Or at least, that's what everyone had always believed. Land near the edge of the river was always shifting with the flood seasons. One year it was fertile ground, the next it could be underwater or claimed by the sands. But this time, the land hadn't changed, the people had. Scribes with scrolls, flanked by guards in tight rows, were marking the edges of fields and muttering about tax records. One of them had made eye contact with Tepi, and though she had no reason to be afraid, she had felt it anyway. That strange tension in the air, like something was being set in motion. In another corner of the village, old Horam, the baker who had once served soldiers during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep, sat on his stool watching the dust clouds rise behind a caravan. He squinted into the light. Merchants from the east, perhaps, maybe bringing incense or lapis lazuli. But even that felt different now. They no longer stopped to chat the way they used to. They moved with a nervous urgency, as though they were trying to stay ahead of something unseen. Inside the temple courtyard, High Priestess Meripta traced her finger along a worn tablet, reciting prayers to Hathor in the fading light. Incense swirled in the air, and novices knelt nearby, their heads bowed. But Meripta wasn't focused on the gods tonight. She was focused on the scroll she had received that morning, a royal decree that didn't sit right. It came with orders to increase offerings from their region, but not offerings of grain or fruit. No, this time it demanded people, workers for some temple far away in the desert. She had seen this before. It often started small. A few workers sent here, a few families relocated there. Always in the name of the gods, always wrapped in official words. But in the end, it was the poor who paid, who were taken, who vanished. And Meripta couldn't shake the feeling that this new request wasn't about honoring any deity. It felt more like the beginning of a shift in power, one that would use faith as a mask. Meanwhile, in the dark back room of a stonemason shop, two brothers argued in hushed tones. One had been summoned to work on a secret construction site outside of the city. He said it was for a burial chamber, a grand one, but he'd seen strange carvings, ones he wasn't allowed to talk about. Not even the foreman knew what they were for, and the workers were being rotated constantly, no one allowed to stay long. The other brother urged him to stay away, to fake an illness or flee to a neighboring town. But the mason shook his head. You couldn't run from these things, he said. When the officials chose you, your name went on a list. Once that happened, even the gods wouldn't save you. Back in the fields, the tension grew thicker with each passing day. Farmers complained of shrinking portions of land, higher quotas, and fewer tools. Even the animals seemed restless. A respected elder named Nebi stood before a crowd at dusk, calling for calm. But as he spoke, a hush fell over the people. Behind him, guards in royal colors stepped forward from the shadows, their presence a silent warning. No one stopped Nebi, but the message was clear. His voice was now being watched. In homes, stories passed in whispers. People spoke of changes in the royal court, of unseen power struggles, of a new vizier who was said to be the true hand behind the Pharaoh. They said he had plans for reshaping the kingdom, for consolidating power in a way that hadn't been done since the time of the pyramid builders. Some called him a visionary, others a curse. Even the tomb painters in the hills, whose job was to bring eternity to life through pigments and stone, began to paint with heavier hands. One artist added a single symbol beneath the depiction of Osiris, a small mark hidden in the folds of servant's robe. It wasn't part of the approved design, but it was a warning, a sign that something was coming. By the riverbank, Tepi returned again the next evening. The men were gone now, but their footprints remained. And in the water, something else floated, half submerged and caught in the reeds. It looked like a bundle of papyrus. Carefully, she pulled it out, her fingers trembling. The scroll inside was damp, the ink smudged, but one phrase was still visible. By decree of the second son, no knowledge shall pass to the lower houses. Tepi had no idea what that meant, but the word stuck with her, clawing at her mind. Second son? What knowledge? And why hide it? In the market, rumors of a stolen artifact spread, an item missing from a storeroom in Thebes. Some claimed it was just a golden idol. Others whispered it was a scroll that held secrets not meant for the living. The guard were searching every home along the Nile road, but no one had found anything. Or maybe someone already had, and they were hiding it. All across the land, from Memphis to Karnak, people began to feel the shift, not in loud proclamations or dramatic events, but in small, almost invisible ways. A change in how the officials walked through villages. A new way tax was collected, fewer priests allowed in certain temples, and a silence that seemed to grow at night. Even the dreams began to change. Farmers dreamed of deserts swallowing their crops. Scribes dreamed of ink turning to blood. Children woke crying, whispering of strange voices in the reeds. And through it all, the Nile kept flowing, carrying with it centuries of secrets and stories, none ever told in full. But it wouldn't be long before the surface cracked, before the quiet lives of the people collided with the larger forces stirring behind palace walls. Something was coming, and when it arrived, the routines of daily life, baking bread, fishing for catfish, weaving linen, would no longer be enough to keep the peace. And as the last sliver of sun dipped behind the hills, Tepi tucked the scroll inside a basket of fish and began the walk home, unaware that she had just become a thread in something much larger than herself, something ancient, hidden, and dangerous. Amanth, the young scribe, hadn't meant to overhear the high priest's whispered conversation. He had been walking through the temple of Khnum just after sunrise, papyrus scrolls bundled under his arm, his sandals whispering softly across the sandstone floor. He paused only for a moment when he heard the voices, deep and sharp, echoing from behind a carved curtain of lotus motifs. The words came through with chilling clarity, something about hidden chambers and sacred tasks being delayed, curses that would return if they did not act soon. Amanth wasn't sure who they were, but the urgency in the voice was unlike anything he'd heard before. He slipped away before he was noticed, heart pounding, scrolls forgotten in his hands. Back in the scribe's quarters, he tried to shake the unease. But even as he dipped his reed, pen, and ink and began copying a legal contract for a grain delivery, his thoughts kept drifting back to the temple. There were too many secrets in Thebes lately, too many hushed conversations and strange looks. Even the vizier's daughter, Iset, had started asking him unusual questions, pressing him gently about what he'd seen in the temple, what he thought about the priests, what he believed the gods were hiding. The daily rhythm of ancient Egyptian life beat on around him. The potters near the river still worked their clay in the early morning light. The washerwomen still laughed as they beat linens clean on the Nile's edge, and the young boys still chased goats through the narrow mud brick alleys of the city. But beneath that surface, something felt off. There was a tension you couldn't quite name, like the moment before a storm when the sky holds its breath. Amanth began noticing little changes. Soldiers lingering too long near the granaries. Priests replacing older temple workers with new faces who didn't speak much and always seemed to be watching. Even the festivals felt different, less joyous, more controlled. At the last procession of Osiris, the people had danced, but the guards had stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning the crowds instead of the skies. It wasn't just him who sensed it. His friend Pahiri, a merchant's son who worked at the docks, had whispered, "Something's wrong." My father says a shipment meant for Memphis was rerouted to an unknown destination. No one's talking about it, but everyone feels it. One evening, Iset invited Amanth to walk the gardens behind her family's villa. The moon was high, and the white lilies glowed like stars among the reeds. She leaned in close and said, "There's a scroll hidden beneath the temple. My nursemaid once served the priests. She says it's older than our city, older than any dynasty. They say it speaks of a time before the gods ruled, of a power buried too deep for mortals to touch." Her voice dropped. "They're trying to find it. The priesthood. And they'll do anything to keep others from discovering it first." Amanth laughed nervously, but inside he felt something tighten. Could it be true? The stories of lost knowledge weren't new. Every child grew up with tales of forbidden tombs and vanished gods. But this was different. This was real, too real. Iset wasn't the kind to chase fantasy. If she believed something dangerous was happening, he had to take it seriously. The next morning, he skipped his usual duties and wandered through the marketplace, pretending to study pottery designs while watching for anyone who might be following him. He saw two men he didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, with shaved heads and dark robes, loitering near the spice vendor where he usually stopped. When he didn't approach, they drifted away without buying anything. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his room, staring at the palm-thatched ceiling, the soft buzz of insects and distant cries from the riverbank filling the silence. By the week's end, he had made a choice. He needed to see it for himself. The hidden scroll, the chamber, whatever it was the priest regarding. Iset agreed to help. She stole a set of ceremonial robes from her father's storeroom and gave Amanth instructions on how to move through the temple's lesser-used corridors without being seen. She even marked the stone on the wall where a secret passage began, behind the statue of Thoth, the god of wisdom. As the sun set over the city, casting long orange shadows across the Nile, Amanth slipped through the temple gates. The guards were distracted by a caravan arriving from the south. He kept his head down, mimicking the quiet, purposeful stride of the lower-ranked temple workers. He entered through the side, where incense hung thick in the air, and the chanting of evening prayers echoed down the halls like a warning. When he reached the statue of Thoth, he paused. The god's face stared down at him, calm and knowing, with an ibis beak that curved like a scythe. He pushed gently on the wall behind it, and to his shock, it moved. A crack opened. He slipped inside and let the stone settle behind him. The air changed instantly, cooler, damp, and tinged with something ancient. The passage was narrow, barely wider than his shoulders, lit only by the faint glow of a small oil lamp Iset had given him. He moved slowly, fingers brushing the walls, heart thudding louder with every step. Strange symbols lined the passage, older than hieroglyphs, rougher, like scratches made in haste or fear. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the soft drip of water from somewhere deep inside. After what felt like hours, he reached a chamber. It was small, barely large enough for two people, and in its center sat a stone pedestal. On it lay a scroll, bound in leather, sealed with wax that bore no emblem he recognized. Amanth reached for it, hands trembling. As his fingers touched the leather, he heard it, a sound like a breath, long and slow, coming not from the chamber, but from within the walls. He froze. Something was there, something not meant to be disturbed. Suddenly, the walls around him seemed to shift, the symbols glowing faintly, as if stirred by his presence. He backed away, scroll still in hand. But when he turned toward the passage, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The door was closed, and the passage behind it no longer led back the way he came. The walls had changed. The way was gone. Amanth was no longer sure where he was, or if he had ever been in the temple at all. The chamber began to hum, a low vibration in the stone itself, and the scroll in his hands grew warm. Whatever knowledge it contained wasn't just sacred, it was alive, and it was waking up. The warmth of the scroll turned into a sharp heat that bit into Amantha's palms. He almost dropped it, but something deeper than instinct told him not to let go. The chamber pulsed again, and the carvings on the walls, ancient, weather-worn symbols etched by forgotten hands, began to shimmer with dull orange light. The very air thickened around him. The humming wasn't coming from the chamber, it was coming from within the scroll. It was speaking, not in words, but in a language of vibration and memory, like the echo of some great truth waiting to break through. A man staggered back, clutching the scroll. Behind him, a sudden gust of cold wind swept through the chamber, though no door had opened. He turned, heart pounding, and saw not a doorway, but a figure, cloaked in rough cloth the color of ash. Its face was obscured, but its presence spoke of centuries. Not hostile, not friendly, just watching, judging. "You read the scroll," the figure said, voice hollow, carried on the walls more than from its own mouth. "You woke it." "I didn't mean to," Amanth said, the words barely more than a whisper. "I was only—" "There is no only anymore," the figure cut in. "Now, the path must unfold." As the words hung in the air, the chamber beneath Amanth shifted. Not collapsed, shifted. Like the temple itself was moving, aligning. The stone slab beneath his feet rose, then tilted. Symbols glowed brighter and rearranged themselves before his eyes, their meanings reshuffling, rewriting the narrative he thought he understood. Amanth reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the shard, the one his brother had found months ago on the lower ridges near the border ruins. It was the same color as the scroll's glow. At the time, it had seemed like a broken artifact. Now it pulsed like it belonged here, like it had been waiting for this very moment. As soon as he held it up, the scroll reacted. The heat vanished. A symbol, once hidden between the lines of script, surfaced, like ink blooming in water. The figure stepped forward, 1 foot silent against the stone. "That shard is not from this world," it said quietly. "And neither are you." "What do you mean?" Amanth asked, voice catching. "I'm from Gyron. I was raised in the Temple District. I trained with the Order. The Order trained what they could control. They taught you rituals, not truths. You were never meant to be their weapon. You were the key." The word key struck something deep. A childhood memory bubbled to the surface, an old story his grandmother used to whisper in the dark. Not a myth, a warning. He clutched the shard tighter, and suddenly the room cracked open. No explosion, no dust, just silence folding in on itself. One moment he was inside the chamber. The next, he stood in a circular hall made entirely of mirrored black stone. The scroll was gone. The figure was gone. But in front of him stood 6 pedestals, each with an object floating above them. A ring of thorns, a blade with no handle, a crown made of bone, a vial of blood, a broken hourglass, and a small wooden box sealed with wax. And across from the pedestals stood someone who should have been dead. Kale. Amantha's voice cracked. His brother looked exactly as he had the last time Amanth saw him. On the forest edge, wounded and desperate. But Kale had vanished that night. The body was never found. Now he stood straight, eyes hard, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier. "You were never supposed to come this far," Kale said coldly. "I looked for you. I thought you were." "I was dead," Kale interrupted, "until I found this place. Until it found me." A man stared at the objects on the pedestals, heart thudding. "What is this place?" Kale stepped toward the vial. "This is where the truth lives. Not the one the Order gave us. Not the one the temple fed you. This is where we choose what becomes of the world." Amantha's breath caught. You mean prophecy? I mean consequence, Kale replied. Everything we've been told was only half the story. They never wanted us to know the rest. A sudden tremor shook the hall. A low groan echoed through the floor like the belly of some ancient creature. A man stumbled, catching himself on the nearest pedestal, the one holding the crown of bone. The moment his fingers brushed the edge, his vision filled with fire and screams. He staggered back, blinking, and the vision faded but not the feeling. The crown remembered things. Kale didn't move. Each object here is a future. One leads to war, one to silence, one to betrayal, one to rebirth, one to death, and one to forgetting. Amanth shook his head. How can any of this be real? Because the scroll let you see it. Because you're the key, Kale said again, softer this time. They always told us stories about a child born during the eclipse, remember? One who would bring either the world's salvation or its ruin. I thought that was just a tale to scare us. Kale looked away. It was real, and you were born on that night. I saw the records myself. The Order lied to you because they feared what you might become. Another tremor, this one stronger. A crack split one of the mirrored walls, light pouring through it like liquid gold. Time's running out, Kale said. Soon, this place will collapse into itself and seal for another 100 years. You have to choose. I don't even know what they mean, Amanth said, backing away from the pedestals. You're not choosing what they mean, Kale said. You're choosing what they become. That's the power of the key. The mirror cracked again, and a rumbling filled the air. Somewhere far away, a voice began to chant, low, rhythmic, and ancient. Not from Kale, not from Amanth, from the walls themselves, from the very roots of the chamber. And then another figure stepped from shadows. This one wasn't cloaked. She wore armor the color of midnight and a ring of symbols around her neck that glowed the same shade as Amantha's shard. Her face was unfamiliar, but her eyes weren't. They were his mother's. I wondered how far you would get, she said, stepping past Kale like he wasn't even there. Amanth took a step back. Who are you? I'm the reason the scroll was hidden. I'm the one who took it from them, she said, her voice steel. And I'm here to stop you from making the wrong choice. Kale reached for the hourglass. The woman raised her hand, and the pedestal vanished. No, she said. Not that one. What is going on? Amanth shouted, the walls groaning now like they were alive, fighting to hold themselves together. What is the right choice? The woman looked at him. There isn't one. Only the one you choose. But know this, each object writes a new world. Not for you. For everyone. Choose wrong, and you won't get a second chance. Kale stepped forward again. She's trying to control you. Just like the Order did. Just like they all did. Amanth looked between them, breath short, heart racing. The scroll, the shard, the objects, all of it had led here. But none of them could tell him what to do. The room cracked again, and light flared behind the walls. The chamber was collapsing. He turned toward the pedestal with the wooden box. Sealed. Quiet. Forgotten. Something about it called to him, not in power, but in peace. Behind him, Kale shouted. The woman moved forward, and Amanth reached out. The warmth from the scroll spread up Amantha's arms, seeping into his chest like liquid fire. His breath hitched. The symbols on the parchment glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the humming walls, as if the entire chamber had a heartbeat. It was no longer just stone and silence. It was something more, something watching. Amanth tried to let go of the scroll, but his fingers wouldn't obey. His knuckles locked, veins in his wrist bulging under the pressure of whatever force now held him in place. The room spun, though his feet stayed rooted. Lights shimmered in the corners of his vision, fragments of languages he didn't know he could understand drifting into his mind like whispers through thick mist. Then came a voice, not loud, not soft, but inside. You are the gate. The words didn't scare him as much as they should have. Instead, they settled into his bones with the familiarity of a name he'd long forgotten. For a moment, the world outside the chamber, his friends, the war, even his own name, slipped out of focus. He wasn't sure he had a body anymore, only awareness. And the scroll? It was reading him. Images flooded his mind. Not visions, memories, but not his own. Battles under a green sky. cities built into the ribs of massive creatures. A planet torn in half, and beings, not quite human, not quite divine, walking its shattered surface. The hum grew louder. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a scream echoed. Sharp, real, human. Amanth blinked, the trance cracking just enough for him to hear it again. Another scream, closer, then boots slamming against stone. The others. They had found him, or something had found them. He jerked the scroll free from his hands and stumbled back, gasping. The moment his skin left the parchment, the chamber fell silent. Dead silent. Not even the air moved. Then the door exploded inward. A body flew through the air. Mayron, one of the scholars from the expedition. She hit the ground hard and didn't move. Behind her, the hallway darkened. Not with shadow, but with something that seemed to drink light. A figure stepped into the room, tall and wrapped in dark robes. But a man saw no face, no eyes, just the space beneath the hood, impossibly deep and shifting. The humming returned, stronger now, and the scroll flared in protest. The figure raised a hand. Amantha's legs buckled, like gravity had quadrupled. He clutched the scroll to his chest, and it burned hotter than ever. The gate must not awaken, the figure said, or thought. It was impossible to tell, but was too late. The knowledge wasn't just awakening, it was aware. Amanth felt it surge inside him, not like a possession, but like a second mind pressed gently against his own. Not controlling, not commanding, just being. It wanted to live, and now it had to. He rose slowly, barely able to stand, forcing himself to move toward the robed figure. "What are you?" he asked, voice strained. The thing paused. "I'm the end of what you've begun." Before Amanth could reply, a second explosion rocked the temple, this one deeper within. Dust rained from the ceiling. The chamber shuddered. The robed figure turned toward the noise. That was Amantha's only chance. He sprinted, not away, but toward the dark figure. The scroll in his arms glowed white-hot, and he thrust it forward like a torch. There was a sound, not a scream, but the absence of sound, like a hole punched through silence itself. The figure recoiled, not in pain, more like surprise. Amanth didn't wait to see more. He ran past it, heart pounding, back in the corridor. The air was thick with smoke and whispers. He didn't recognize the temple anymore. The familiar walls had twisted, like the structure itself was folding in on something it didn't want to contain. He found Shiva bleeding near a broken column, eyes wide but alive. He pulled her up without a word, and they moved. Behind them, the hum grew into a roar. More figures were arriving. Not people, shapes, shadows with weight. They drifted between the stone, not bound by walls or logic. Amanth and Shiva ducked, weaved, stumbled through paths that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. Somewhere ahead, light broke through the chaos. A breach in the wall where moonlight poured in. They ran toward it, not because they knew what was outside, but because anything was better than the thing waking up below. Just as they reached the breach, Amanth turned for one last look. The chamber was no longer a room. It had become a maw, stone peeled back like ribs around a heart of white fire. The scroll pulsed against his chest, and for a moment he saw through it. Not just the temple, the world. And it was cracking. Every border, every structure, every rule of reality. It all shimmered like reflections on disturbed water. He understood, just for a second, why the knowledge had been hidden, why the scroll had been sealed. Not because it was dangerous, because it was true, and the truth didn't care about order. It didn't serve kings or gods. It simply was. Amanth stumbled out into the open night, the stars overhead spinning in unfamiliar constellations. The ground beneath him heaved, distant mountains blinking in and out like candle flames. Whatever had started below the temple had already begun to spread. Beside him, Shiva gasped. She had seen it too. Behind them, the temple collapsed, not down, but in, folding like a paper house. The roar stopped. Not silence this time, but something worse. Stillness. The kind that waits. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. But deep in Amantha's chest, the scroll still pulsed. Not hot now, calm. Waiting. Not all doors swing open at once. Some wait until you've walked far enough that there's no going back. And the next one was just ahead. The warmth from the scroll turned into a steady pulse, like a heartbeat. Not his, not human, but something older. Amantha's grip tightened as the glyphs etched into the ancient parchment shimmered, no longer flat ink, but raised, moving, alive with purpose. A glow, subtle at first, leaked from the lines between the symbols, lighting the chamber in soft, golden threads that pulsed with the rhythm of something unseen yet all-present. He backed away instinctively, but the scroll didn't let him go. It clung to his hands, as though fused by invisible threads, drawing him toward the center of the chamber. The humming deepened, resonating through his ribs and skull. He staggered forward, pulled by forces that refused to be understood. When his knees hit the smooth stone, he was no longer resisting. Not because he accepted what was happening, but because resistance had simply stopped being an option. From the floor beneath him, patterns began to light up. An intricate spiral carved into the stone that had always been there, but was now awakened. The golden glow flowed from the scroll and filled the lines on the floor, rushing outward in arcs that connected with the edges of the chamber. And then came the voice. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. There was no sound. It was inside him, yet not his own. It carried no language, yet he understood it perfectly. It didn't speak in words, but in meaning, in raw knowledge. And what it revealed cracked open something inside him that could never be sealed again. You were never chosen. You chose. That is the difference. That is the price. Asterisk, asterisk. The scroll pulsed in response, and he saw, felt the ancient war was born from. A war not of kingdoms, but of thought, of memory, of souls, and a rewriting of them. The scroll, this living artifact, was not just a record. It was a weapon, a vessel, a gate. Amanth gasped, and then, from behind him, came the sound of footsteps. Real, sharp against stone, urgent. Navian. She burst into the chamber, hair loose and face flushed, sword drawn. Amanth, she shouted, then stopped cold when she saw the scene. Her eyes widened as the glowing glyphs ran up his arms like veins of light. You opened it, she whispered. I didn't mean to, he replied, breathless. It opened me. Navian didn't move. Her grip on the sword trembled, but not from fear. She was calculating, observing. And then he noticed it too. The sword she carried, passed down through her family line, was glowing. The same golden threads. Navian, he said, it's connected to your blade. No, she said softly. It's connected to my blood. And that was when he understood. She had known something he didn't. Something about her lineage, her purpose, her role. She had followed him not out of loyalty, but because she was part of whatever this was. She wasn't a side character in his journey. She was a piece of the scroll's design. But before Amanth could speak again, a tremor shook the ground. Not a small one. It cracked stone in the walls, sent dust raining from the ceiling, and with it, the golden light flickered. The scroll's heartbeat was interrupted. Navian rushed forward and knelt beside him. It's calling something. No, Amanth corrected, the truth forming in his chest like a scream. It's not calling something. It's warning something. As if in response, the chamber walls began to darken, not from shadow, but from absence. The stone itself began to disintegrate at the edges, turning to dust, fading into something less than matter. And out of that fading came a shape, a figure, human at first glance, but then not at all. Its features were indistinct, moving like oil on water. Its eyes were hollow, filled with spirals like those etched in the scroll. Navian stood to defend them, sword raised. The figure did not react. It simply observed, and then it spoke, not in voice, but in echo. You awaken what should remain buried. Navian answered aloud. We were only searching for truth. Truth is not your right. It is your burden. Asterisk, asterisk. The scroll pulsed in Amantha's hands again, harder now, drawing him to his feet. As he stood, something changed in the room. The figure recoiled slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. You know what this is? Amanth said to the figure, lifting the scroll slightly. You were there when it was made. I was made because of it. Amanth blinked. Then what are you? The spiral-eyed figure began to fragment at the edges. Its limbs blurred, its form flickering in and out like a corrupted memory. I am a memory it stole. That line sank deep into both of them. Navian looked at Amanth, confused. Stole. I think this scroll doesn't just record events, he said, voice shaking. It consumes them, preserves them by taking them, erasing them from the world. The figure stepped forward now, and the golden light dimmed in response. You hold what is forbidden. Return it. Asterisk, asterisk. But Amanth shook his head. I don't think I can. Then you will become like me. A hollow. A shell of something once known. Asterisk, asterisk. Suddenly, the scroll lashed out, a tendril of light extending from it like a whip. It struck the figure, and where it landed, the creature collapsed inward, part of its form sucked into itself like paper burning in reverse. The scream it gave off wasn't sound. It was feeling, grief, rage, loss. Navian grabbed Amantha's shoulder. This thing, whatever it isn't done with you. I know, he said quietly. The scroll now pulsed faster, its glow urgent. The glyphs were shifting rapidly, forming new patterns in real time. Amantha's mind struggled to keep up, but one word began repeating over and over in his thoughts. Threshold, 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 asterisk, asterisk. The spiral on the floor brightened again, brighter than before, and the walls of the chamber began to fracture, showing glimpses of a sky that wasn't their own. Not stars, not clouds, not any sky from this world. Navian gritted her teeth. Whatever's on the other side of that spiral, it's not meant for mortals. But Amanth was already stepping forward. Neither is this scroll. The figure's voice cracked through once more as the chamber shook. Enter, and you do not return. Navian reached for him, but her hand passed through the light that now surrounded his form. It was as if he was already halfway gone. Her voice trembled. Amanth, if you go. I'm not going, he said, eyes glowing with the scroll's patterns. It is. The scroll lifted itself from his hands as if alive, floating into the center of the spiral. As it hovered there, spinning slowly, the entire chamber seemed to stretch outward, time slowing, reality fraying at the seams. Navian took a step back, shielding her eyes. What is it doing? Rewriting, Amanth whispered. And then everything went white. But not with light, with silence. The chamber, the spiral, the scroll, even the figure. Everything was suddenly still, frozen. And then, slowly, one by one, the pieces began to move again, but nothing was the same. The figure was gone. The scroll had vanished. The glyphs were dark. And Amanth stood in the center of the room, alone. Except something had changed. His shadow was missing. And so was his name. The scroll pulsed like a heartbeat in Amantha's hands. Every syllable, once carved and forgotten, now shifted as if the words were rewriting themselves. He wasn't reading anymore. He was receiving. Images rushed into his mind faster than thought. An ancient city burning under black skies, a golden eye watching from beneath the earth, and at its center, a figure not unlike himself. But it wasn't him. It was someone older, someone who had opened the scroll centuries ago and never left. Behind him, the chamber's walls creaked, as though the stone itself was breathing. Dust spilled from the carvings above, and deep cracks began splitting across the floor. Amanth backed away, still clutching the scroll, as the center of the room split open in a sudden quake. From the widening gap, something began to rise, an obelisk carved with the same script as the scroll, but glowing faintly blue. It hovered just a few inches above the stone, humming louder and louder. It was then he saw her, Elia, the guide who had brought him through the jungle. She stood at the entrance of the chamber, her eyes wide with something he hadn't seen in her before. Fear? No. Asterisk recognition star. She wasn't just a guide. She knew this place. You read it? She asked, her voice steady but urgent. I didn't mean to, Amanth replied, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. He had always meant to. From the moment he'd heard the legends, from the day he first uncovered the fractured stone near the coast, he had been drawn to it. What is this place? Elia stepped forward slowly. You found the eye, she said. The one the old texts warned about. The eye doesn't just see, it remembers. It stores every soul who seeks its truth. It was meant to stay locked forever. But the scroll is the key, she finished. The room trembled again. The obelisk rose higher, and now the air shimmered around it. Something ancient and vast was awakening. Not a god, not a demon, but a memory too powerful to die. It had waited beneath the temple for generations, feeding on the curiosity of those who sought to know too much. It didn't kill. It absorbed, and it had begun to study Amath. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head, and images flooded back. But these weren't from the scroll. They were his own memories. His first expedition. His parents. That night he almost drowned off the coast of Emer's Reach. The eye was taking them. Elia ran forward and grabbed his wrist. "Drop the scroll." "I can't," he said. And it was true. His fingers wouldn't obey. They had fused to the parchment like roots in soil. "It won't let me." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small shard of obsidian wrapped in twine. It pulsed faintly, just like the scroll had. "This is from the outer rim of the ruins," she said quickly. "It's a null stone. It absorbs energy from the old tech. Might break the connection." Without waiting, she pressed it against the scroll. The moment it touched, the chamber screamed. The sound wasn't heard. It was felt like a knife of pressure stabbing through every bone. Amath dropped to his knees, the scroll falling with him, and the obelisk flared. For a moment, the eye's presence resisted. But then something unexpected happened. It blinked. Not literally, but the glow of the obelisk dimmed, as if it had been shocked, wounded, confused. Amath felt the pressure ease in his skull. His memories stopped draining. He looked at Aaliyah, who had gone pale. "You weakened it," he whispered. "I think we just pissed it off," she whispered back. Then the unexpected twist came, not from the eye, but from Amath himself. Somewhere deep within him, something stirred. A memory he didn't know he had. Not a vision from the scroll, but something buried far earlier. A man standing before a similar obelisk. Only that man had sealed it. With a chant. With blood. "I've been here before," Amath said. Aaliyah looked confused. "That's not possible. I remember this place. I remember closing it." "You're remembering someone else," she said. "The eye does that. It gives you false memories to lure you into merging." "No," Amath stepped forward, ignoring the pain. "It's not false. It's mine. I was here. I sealed it. And now I've opened it." The obelisk reacted to his voice. Symbols raced across its surface, faster and faster, until they blurred. The chamber darkened. A final tremor rocked the room. Amath turned to Aaliyah, eyes wide with clarity. "This wasn't an accident. I came back because it needed me to." She reached for the shard again, but he held up a hand. "No more null stone. It won't stop this now. There's only one way to close it again." "You'll lose everything," she said quietly. "Your memories, your mind, maybe your life." "Maybe I already have," he said, looking down at the scroll. "But if I started this, I have to end it." With slow, deliberate steps, he approached the obelisk. The script now shone white-hot. His body shook with every movement. The eye was resisting him, not out of anger, out of fear. It remembered him too. He placed both palms against the stone. Words came unbidden, not from a scroll, but from his blood. Ancient syllables, soft and rhythmic. A chant, a seal, a farewell. The chamber darkened further as the eye began to pull inward. Not just light, but thought, history, regret. And then came the twist. Just as the eye began to collapse inward, it offered him a choice. It wasn't malicious. It offered. A man saw it not as a force of destruction, but as a guardian. It had taken those who came too close not to harm them, but to protect the world from what they would release. But it was tired. It needed a keeper. "You don't have to destroy me," the voice said in his mind. "You can guide me. Shape what comes next. You've done it before. You can do it again." Amath wavered. Outside the stone, Aaliyah shouted something, but he couldn't hear her anymore. The chamber had gone completely silent. Only the eye in him remained. And then he chose. He whispered a single word. The eye pulsed one final time. The light faded. The symbol stopped. The obelisk, once floating, settled gently onto the stone floor with a soft thud. Amanth fell backward, unconscious. Elia rushed forward and checked his pulse. It was there, faint but steady. She looked around. The chamber had gone still. No more humming. No more movement. The scroll had turned to ash. Whatever had happened, the temple was no longer alive. But Amanth might still be. As she pulled him in her arms, she looked up at the silent obelisk, unsure if they had won or just begun a new chapter. The light faded slowly, like a sunrise in reverse, until the chamber dimmed to a soft glow once more. Amanth stood in the center, the scroll no longer burning in his hand, but cool and weightless, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. The storm outside had vanished, replaced by silence, not just the absence of noise, but a peace that settled in the bones. He looked around and saw the walls of the temple no longer trembling. The symbols etched into the stone shimmered faintly, like embers of something ancient and now at rest. He took a slow breath, as if breathing for the first time since stepping inside. The warmth in his chest hadn't left. It had only deepened, rooted like something sacred taking hold. The scroll had not just given him knowledge, it had changed him. His memories came rushing back, but not as pain. They came with clarity. His village, his family, the truth about his exile. Everything had been twisted by fear, both his and theirs. The vision from the chamber, the faces he thought lost, had not been a haunting. It was a reminder. A man stepped out into the hallway, surprised to see the walls had shifted. The carvings, once warnings of doom, now depicted guidance, people reaching out to one another, rebuilding what had been broken. The temple hadn't been a prison or a trap. It was a place of reflection, and now that he had faced the truth, it was letting him go. He found Vera waiting at the entrance, her face pale with worry. She looked like she hadn't moved from that spot since he entered. "It's done," Amanth said quietly. Vera stared at him, then at the scroll, and then back again. "You're different." "I am," he admitted, "but not in the way I feared." They stood together in the stillness, neither speaking for a while. When they did start walking down the mountain path again, the sky was open, calm, and full of light. No storm, no illusion, just truth. But before they reached the forest, a low rumble echoed behind them. Amanth turned sharply. The temple had begun to collapse, not violently, but with purpose. The stone folded inward as though it had never existed. Dust rose into the air, and the great mountain swallowed the remnants of the structure. Was that supposed to happen? Vera asked. "Yes," he said. "It was waiting for someone to understand it. Now that it's done, it has no more reason to remain." They made their way down without speaking further, each step a gentle return to the world they had nearly lost. When they arrived back in the lowlands, the village was already awake. People had gathered, whispering, pointing at the clear skies and the strange calm. For the first time in weeks, no one spoke of death or bad omens. The sickness that had plagued the land was gone, leaving only awe and confusion. Word spread quickly of Amantha's return. The elders were cautious, unsure whether to believe the stories whispered by Vera and the other scouts. But when Amanth stepped forward, holding the faded scroll, he didn't beg for forgiveness or demand acknowledgement. He simply spoke. "The temple was never cursed," he said. "It was a reflection of us, of our fear, our mistakes, and what we chose not to face." Some turned away. Others listened closely. One by one, people began asking questions. And Amanth answered, not as a prophet or a hero, but as someone who had seen the truth and survived it. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly. The crops began to grow again. The children played in the fields. Old grudges, long held between families, began to dissolve. The elders, humbled, invited Amanth to speak at their gatherings, not to lead, but to share. He spoke of memory, truth, and the courage to face one's own shadow. Vera stayed close, though she never said much about what had happened on the mountain. She didn't need to. Her loyalty had spoken louder than any words. And though the scroll eventually crumbled into dust, its message had already taken root. The wisdom wasn't in the ink, it was in the people who chose to listen. Months later, As the season turned, a man stood at the edge of the river that bordered the village. Children played nearby. One of them ran up to him, eyes wide. "Is it true you spoke to a living scroll?" the child asked. "I listened to it," a man said. "That's the difference." The child smiled and ran off again, joining the others in their laughter. Amanth watched them a moment longer, then looked up at the mountains in the distance. There were more temples out there, more truths buried in silence. He had faced one. There would be others. But now, he knew he wouldn't be alone. The past was not something to run from. It was something to understand. And sometimes understanding it was enough to change everything. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, and for a moment, Amanth thought he heard a hum, faint like memory, but alive and always just within reach.